These are the most active companies on a coronavirus vaccine. The international race is on as countries across the globe rush to find the most coveted vaccine of the century against COVID-19. In our video today, you'll find out the frontrunners in this all-too-important race, as these are the most active companies on a coronavirus vaccine. Welcome to Trending's Finest, where we give you the hottest updates on the world's most viral news, videos, and stories in the most exciting format. Click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to not miss a single beat of the world's pulse. There are over 169 COVID-19 vaccine candidates under development, with 26 of these in the human trial phase. WHO is working in collaboration with scientists, business, and global health organizations through the ACT Accelerator, or Access to COVID-19 Resources, to speed up the pandemic response. Discover in this video the different types of vaccines being developed and the frontrunners in the global vaccine race, including the highly publicized Russian vaccine and the competitor who seems to have them all beat. Stay tuned. Russian vaccine. Gamaleya Research Institute. This is the Russian vaccine that made so many headlines not long ago, and for the moment we have no more to say aside from the fact that its approval in Russia was nothing more than a publicity stunt. This uses viral vectors through a two-shot dosing program, but one of them is an AD5 vector and the other is an AD26. Viral vectors. This class uses some other infectious virus, but with its original genetic material removed. In its place goes genetic instructions to make coronavirus proteins, and when your infected cells do that, these proteins will set off an immune response. Note that this is different than being infected with a real virus, whose instructions are naturally enough to produce more virus, which go off and infect more cells. No, in this case, each viral particle that you're injected with will be able to infect one cell, and that's it. An advantage of this approach is that it should appear to your immune system like a pretty realistic viral attack and set off a full range of responses. A disadvantage is that this technique has only once been used in human therapy, the Ebola vaccine, although it's had a lot of work from a lot of groups over the years. Things have now accelerated, a phrase that you can just keep using these days. Another disadvantage is that if you pick a viral vector that infects people anyway, some of your patients may already have antibodies to that one. That can mean that your attempt to repurpose it might crash and burn as your carefully engineered vector gets attacked by antibodies and eaten by immune cells before it can even do its work. It also means that booster shots would have an uphill battle, since the antibodies from the first dose will be waiting for the second one. Antibodies to the viral payload. Good. Antibodies to the viral vector itself? Not so much. Oxford Astrazeneca. This one's been in thousands of patients in the UK, Brazil, and South Africa, and the team recently announced a trial in the US as well. And even though I just finished up talking about how booster shots with a viral vector can be tricky, that's exactly what they're studying. 2 doses, 4 weeks apart. Clinical results released in late July looked promising. With this being the latest one, there have been supply deals announced. Both the EU and the US have paid to reserve hundreds of millions of doses if the clinical results are sufficient for a rollout. This trial was recently paused as of September 8th on reports of a serious adverse event, likely transverse myelitis, AMMS. We had clinical data from this one at about the same time as the Oxford publication, and you could indeed see the pre-existing immunity problem with this adenovirus. The paper itself stated that this was a big concern. CanSino has just canceled plans for a phase 3 trial in Canada for reasons that frankly are still obscure. Probably politics. But to be honest, Canada is doing pretty well with the pandemic and is probably not a good place to collect phase 3 data to start with. But they're starting a 5,000 patient trial in Saudi Arabia and have announced a phase 3 in Russia, with plans to go into Pakistan and Mexico as well. Now, those populations have plenty of coronavirus cases, unfortunately. Existing immunity varies in different populations around the world, but in general, it looks like too many people already have antibodies to the vector itself. Johnson & Johnson, Janssen. These folks have another obscure adenovirus, AD26. In an attempt to avoid those problems, they've announced a phase 3 trial starting this month that looks like the largest in the field, up to 60,000 patients, in locations all around the world. They've also been signing deals for reserving hundreds of millions of doses should things work out and continue to expand their manufacturing capacity. It seems that they're the only ones at present who are not running a booster shot trial, which could be an interesting logistical advantage for them. Genetic vaccines. These take DNA or RNA coding for coronavirus proteins and inject that directly into the bloodstream. Directly isn't quite the right word, though. For these things to work, they have to be formulated and modified to survive destruction in the blood, to be taken up through cell membranes, and to be used for protein production once they're inside. There have been extensive experiments in animal models over the years, but this is another category where no existing human vaccine uses the technology yet. Advantages include fast development and possibly ease of manufacture, depending on how exotic the final form turns out to be, and lack of an existing immune response to the vaccine itself. The big disadvantage is, well, once again, no one has taken these things into humans yet. It also looks like the ones under development will need to be stored under rather stringent cold chain conditions. Moderna. Well, you can't open up a news site without reading something about Moderna. So I'll highlight that the company has released some data on their vaccine candidates' performance in older patients, and they look good. The company says that it's on target to complete enrollment in its phase 3 trial by the end of the month, and in response to some worries, is now publishing data on the diversity of its patient population. Like all the frontrunners, we're waiting on efficacy data, and everything we have to say now will be outweighed by what those numbers tell us. Pfizer BioNTech. This one is also on track to complete enrollment late this month, and the company continues to stick with its optimistic timelines. Their CEO said today that they might have results in October, but that means the very end of October, surely. Imperial College. This seems to be the leading self-amplifying mRNA candidate left, after Pfizer and BioNTech dropped theirs. They've shown good results in mice, and a phase 1 trial is underway in England, with reports of trials starting in Uganda by the end of the year. An advantage of the self-amplifying platform is that it takes lower dosages, but it's not something that's been tried in humans until now. Attenuated virus vaccines. This is another well-precedented vaccination technique. It involves producing a weakened form of the actual infectious virus, one that's not capable of causing damage but can still set off the immune system. There are several ways to do this, and it's a bit of an art form involving taking the virus through a huge number of replications in living cells as you select for variants that are less and less harmful. An advantage is that such vaccines can be quite effective at raising a response. Ideally, the immune system reacts exactly as it would to the real pathogen, except you avoid all the getting sick part. A disadvantage is that part about it being an art form. Balancing the lack of harm with immunogenicity is not something that can always be achieved. Some viruses have a wider window for this sort of thing than others, and it's not easy or possible, really, to know if this is a feasible pathway up front. That may well be one reason why only one company is pursuing this route. Mesa Vaccines. This small company announced earlier in the summer that it had a pre-IND meeting with the FDA about its attenuated coronavirus program and was doing preclinical studies. If there's been more news since then, we haven't been able to track it down. Keep watching as we show you more vaccine types and the frontrunners in the race against time and the world, including the early favorite among them all. Inactivated virus vaccines. This is also a technique that's been used in medical practice for many years, and it's another inactivation step beyond the attenuated viruses. Heat or chemical agents are used to damage the virus to the point that it can no longer infect cells at all. But the plan is for there to be enough of the viral material left unaltered to still raise an immune response. Not the most high-tech approach, but it can definitely work. Many times, though, vaccines of this type don't provide enough of a response in a single shot, so you'll very likely be looking at a booster vaccine schedule. Interestingly, the Chinese group seem to have this field to themselves, since there's no news of any inactivated virus vaccine for the pandemic that's in serious development anywhere else. Sinopharm, Wuhan Institute of Biological Products. This candidate was the subject of a recent publication on a phase 1 human trial, and that, while a bit light on details, was notable for a rather mild side effect profile. We'll wait on the efficacy data. This one's currently being tested in the UAE. Cenovac. They're in phase 3 trials in Brazil and Indonesia, but that hasn't stopped the Chinese government from authorizing its use in high-risk groups of government employees. Both governments have signed agreements to purchase the vaccine if it continues to show good clinical data. Bharat Biotech. This candidate is currently in phase 1/2 trials at several locations in India, and the company's also received permission to conduct a separate trial with intradermal dosing, which should in theory use less vaccine per dose. What we're not seeing is any more of the craziness back in July that would have had the vaccine theoretically launched 2 weeks ago, which is a relief. Virus-like particles. Here's yet another category which can be thought of as a strep virus. A VLP has most or all of the surface proteins of the real virus, but doesn't have the genetic payload inside and therefore cannot replicate. But the immune response that develops to the surface antigens is still available. This technique is already used for vaccines against HPV and hepatitis B, so it's proven that it can work well. You have several options for preparing such VLPs, mixing and matching material from the natural virus or more than one natural virus and recombinant proteins. Mitsubishi Tanabe Medicago. This is a plant-based candidate coming from tobacco leaves. Some plant-derived proteins can have very different immunogenic profiles than the same protein produced by other methods. Different glycosylation patterns generally. They're currently in phase 1 with plans to go on to phase 2 and 3 in October. They're using adjuvants from both GSK and from Novavax to go along with their proteins. Oxford Spy Biotech. Here's a new one based on a protein engineering system known as Spycatcher. Molecular biology aficionados will know this one already. It's an efficient protein conjugation method with the two domains engineered to form a new covalent bond to each other when you express them in your desired targets and let them mix. That's been used to put spike antigen proteins, the RBD part, onto a known VLP called MI3, a technique that was already being investigated before the coronavirus epidemic even showed up. Mice given the RBD itself raised a detectable but not very strong immune response, but when the RBD was conjugated onto the MI3 particles, that construct set off a much more potent and wide-ranging antibody response. It's currently unknown if this can get into human trials in time to help, but it does look quite interesting. Recombinant protein vaccines. Here we get to a technique that really is used for human vaccines where they make proteins industrially and just inject them directly. The advantage can be that such protein production can be accomplished in many ways and is already done on a large scale. That said, every new protein is a new project, with its own idiosyncrasies. A disadvantage is that this technique sometimes does not produce enough of a robust immune response by itself and needs added adjuvants as part of the vaccine formulation. These are substances that increase immunologic reaction through mechanisms that honestly have not always been so well understood over the years. Novavax. This company seems to be the leader in this area at the moment. They have just published results from their phase 1/2 trials, and the antibody responses look good after the second dose of their adjuvant-containing vaccine. The results were, in fact, quite similar to the 5 microgram and 25 microgram dosage groups, which highlights the work that the adjuvant is doing. CD4 plus T cells were also induced, but there were no data on CD8 plus. It looks like this one will be handled under standard refrigerator temperature shipping and storage. The safety profile looks good so far as well. While the others in human trials, we're going to have to wait for the key efficacy numbers to sort things out. In an interesting development, though, Novavax is the only vaccine developer to explicitly say they would be willing to take the FDA up on Commissioner Hahn's recent proposal to have companies file for approval before their Phase 3 trials are complete. Sanofi GSK. Coming up fast now is this big pharma competitor. The companies have announced today that they've started a Phase 1/2 trial at 11 sites across the United States, with a Phase 3 to start in December. This one is using GSK's adjuvant technology, which is already in human vaccines, and will also be shipped and stored at refrigerator temperatures and not freezers or worse, like the mRNA candidates. That's right, folks. Those are a lot of vaccine candidates. We told you the race is on. There are some big ones that everyone knows about, but a lot of people are bringing a lot of cutting-edge technology to bear on the problem. With many names on the field, it'll most likely turn out that there will be the first vaccines approved, then the second wave, then the improvements on those until we have, with luck, hard work, skill, and lots of money, tossed this virus out of the human population and back to the bats, pangolins, or whoever had it in the first place. A consoling bonus as well is that vaccine technology will never be the same after this. This whole pandemic has been awful in many different ways, but we're going to come out of it stronger and more capable than when we went in. What do you think? Would you be willing to be one of the first wave of vaccine takers? What's your bet on when it'll be available? Tell us in the comments down below, and let's make a conversation out of it. Even our strongest athletes aren't safe from this dreaded disease. Watch our other video, Which tennis players have COVID-19, to find out the latest COVID news regarding the U.S. Open and the biggest names in the sport, including the player who was recently infected but is now competing in this tournament. Thank you for watching. This is Trending's Finest. Always the trendiest, always the finest.